there, welcome to The Sacred Journey. The Sacred Journey is the program that reminds you that life is a wonderful adventure and each and every experience we have is a unique and perfect opportunity for learning. I'm Joyce St. Germaine, and tonight's program may seem at first a little out of our normal topic range. It's breastfeeding, natural baby food, and I'm so thrilled to have with me Annie Brown. Annie is a family nurse practitioner and a lactation consultant, and I had the deep pleasure and honor to meet and work with Annie on the Lakota Reservation. You hear me talk about Hawk Wing, the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. So Annie, thank you so much for coming, because I know it's a topic that most people go, oh, what is there to know about that? Well, you and I had a chance to talk, and I learned so much because I've never had children, so it's never been in my personal experience, but so much to know about breastfeeding. Why is it the best food for babies? The best first food, I should say.
Yes. Well, breastfeeding is, breast milk from a mother is species specific. So it is only made by humans for human babies, just like cows should feed their babies cow milk, and sheep should feed their babies sheep milk, and dolphins should feed their babies dolphin milk. Humans should feed their babies human milk, if at all possible.
That made so much sense when you described that to me. We met last summer, and I just took for granted that everybody knew that it's the best thing because it's not processed, it doesn't have additives and chemicals, but it isn't comfortable or natural for everyone. Sometimes there are some reasons that women can't or shouldn't breastfeed. Would you like to share those?
Yes, that is true. While breast milk might be the best food for every baby, it is not always possible or practical for every mother to breastfeed. But what my job is to help the mothers who desire to breastfeed to do the best that they can do.
Well, just one of the simple things about cost. I hear what the cost of formula is, to the point where some people were stealing and selling it on the black market. May I assume the cost with breastfeeding is nowhere like that?
Well, I guess you also have to factor in the fact that mothers need to eat too. So,
Correct.
And breastfeeding usually burns about 500 calories a day extra on top of what someone might normally eat. So you do have to factor in the food that the mother needs to make enough milk as well.
And also the work schedule. So sometimes that could be a little prohibitive.
If mothers do have to go back to work, yes, but if it is, you can still breastfeed and be employed full time.
Okay. Why would someone need a lactation consultant? Women have been breastfeeding for hundreds of thousands of years.
That's true. And I think one of the reasons why is in the 1920s, during the Industrial Revolution and women's temperance, there was a big push for women to go back to work. So it became practical for the women who did need to go back to work to be able to feed their babies in another way. And in the late 1800s, Henri Nestle developed a formula, an infant formula that could be used to replace mother's milk for the babies. It was originally planned out for babies who could not take their mother's milk. Either they had difficulty at the breast, or there was just no way for them to get the milk that they needed. So it was a life-saving formula back then. And now it's used as a replacement for breastfeeding, and not necessarily to save a baby's life, but just because of lifestyle.
Like convenience, maybe.
Perhaps that's one of them as well.
Now, a woman has to be, I would assume, very conscientious about what she ingests if she's going to be breastfeeding. Does everything that a woman ingests, medications, drugs, alcohol, nutrients, does everything get transferred in breast milk?
In most cases, when mothers are eating a very good diet, their diet will help to make the milk that they need for their babies. In incidences of malnutrition, which is not very common in this country, but outside in other countries you might find that, you will find that the woman's body will not spare the breast milk. So everything that the mother has in her will go into the breast milk to continue the species, and she will suffer.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So yes,
That's extraordinary.
That
when
is
you
very
think about it.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, that's what nature wants to continue the species. So it
Okay.
wants very much to have that next generation to get the best that they can at the expense of the mother. However, here in the United States, most people have diets that are, enough to, sustain both the mother and the baby. And some people do have to take medications, which is one of the things that you were talking about. Most medications are compatible with breastfeeding. There are very few that are not, and those are usually in the category of chemotherapy drugs, like if a mother has cancer or something like that, things that are toxic to the mother that may also go in through the breast milk to be toxic to the baby. But in most cases, unless they're drugs of abuse or medications that are very toxic, mothers can still breastfeed their babies and take those medications.
How about tobacco use?
Tobacco use is...
I mean, we know it's not good on any level, but as far as breastfeeding specifically.
Right. You can get the byproducts of tobacco in the breast milk, but it's not contraindicated. That means that mothers can smoke and breastfeed their babies. However, there is a time frame that works better. So if you're going to have your cigarette, have it outside and wait about 30 minutes or so before you nurse your baby so that they minimize the effects of the nicotine.
How about alcohol?
That's a very good question because most people would like to have a little beer here and there, and if an occasional drink is not contraindicated with breastfeeding. Of course, alcoholism can be a potential problem if a mother drinks to excess daily, then that could certainly affect the baby as well. But in most cases, if people are just going to have 1 or 2 drinks, then again, it's a timing thing. You wait several hours depending on how many drinks you have, and it is usually at a low enough level that you can breastfeed your baby without having too many worries.
So a glass of wine at dinner, if someone enjoys that, they're able to maintain that?
Yes, an occasional glass of wine. Yes.
Okay. What kind of problems would a woman have that would prevent her, or what kind of problems might a baby have that would prevent them from being the perfect candidates for breastfeeding? And what could be done, if anything, about that?
Well, those are good questions. The first one is, we're going to talk about the baby. The absolute contraindications to breastfeeding for a baby is if a baby has a disease called galactosemia, which is the inability to break down galactose, which is milk sugar. And those babies need to have specific formulas, so they cannot breastfeed at all.
Ever?
Ever.
They don't outgrow it, it's just never, okay.
Yes, it's something they will always need to have a diet that is low or absent in galactose, which is milk sugar.
Is that usually determined early on, right after birth? It's
they
obvious?
test the babies for that when they're born.
Oh,
That's one of
okay.
the newborn testing regimens. And the second thing here in the United States is if the mother is HIV positive. In other countries, if a mother is HIV positive and they are in a third world country where it is more dangerous to use formula because they could reconstitute it with dirty water or other things like that, then they should continue to breastfeed even if they have HIV. But here in the United States, where we have good sanitary practices, it is contraindicated to nurse your baby with HIV.
Okay, interesting to know.
But those are the really only 2 contraindications for babies.
Now, I know you said when we were talking earlier that sometimes a baby isn't able to latch properly or latch at all. Yes. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, sometimes babies are born with difficulties, either structural, neurological, muscular, that make it difficult for them, or if not impossible, to latch on the breast. And most often it is a matter of identifying what that problem is. And we don't always have that ability in the hospital. Babies are only usually in the hospital if a mother has a vaginal birth for 2 days, sometimes less. So if a baby doesn't latch on in the hospital, that usually becomes the pediatrician's problem later down the road. So if a mother goes home without a baby latching, then that could be an issue. So that's where lactation consultants come in. And yet you had asked before, is where did this profession come from? Is that, back in the 1920s when bottles were introduced, we have a whole generation or 2 of families that have never breastfed. So we've lost that grandmother wisdom. So,
and the bonding, I would imagine, the emotional bonding, I would imagine would be
yes,
very
and you
great.
can still emotionally bond with your baby with a bottle, but they have shown that there has been a greater incidents of bonding with mothers who are nursing. But because we don't have that, our mothers didn't nurse, our grandmothers didn't nurse, we don't have that wisdom. And that is one of the things that the lactation consultant profession brings to the table, is we have mothers who have never held a baby before, never mind breastfed a baby. So they're still learning about how to be a mother, and then you have to learn how to nurse their baby. So it is very difficult at times for some people to do this. And the lactation consultant profession was actually born out of La Leche League, which is the breastfeeding support group that was started in 1956. So this is their 60-year anniversary, actually, in October. So the La Leche League groups, which are all volunteers, it's an international organization where most mothers in their communities can connect with a volunteer group where they can go to the meetings for free, bring their babies, and get the help that they need.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes.
And your contact info, Annie, will show up at the end of our show. People can contact you, I would hope, would be okay, and you could guide them into other resources?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or they could
Excellent.
look up the La Leche League online as well.
Okay, fantastic.
And that's a free service. And a lot of La Leche League leaders know how to get in touch with lactation consultants. A lot of things that are, very easy to solve can be solved by a community support person who's had some training, such as La Leche League. But if people have more difficulties, like a baby has difficulty latching on, or a baby has other issues that are, medical issues that are making it difficult for them to nurse, they usually need to have a little bit more of an advanced level. Lactation consultants do that. And my job as a nurse practitioner lactation consultant is to look at the big picture, is to look at everything involved in the baby. So when I see a mother and a baby, when I go to the visit, I am examining the baby just like the physician would at a regular visit. I'm examining the mother, the important parts for her as well, so that I am doing a complete and comprehensive exam on both the delivery end and the receiving end. So I will be using my stethoscope, and I will usually be listening to the baby's heartbeat and their lungs. I'll be listening to their tummies and how their digestive process is going. And I will also use this to listen to their swallowing. So when they're nursing at the breast, I will be listening for swallowing and seeing how it goes and listening how it goes. So I could tell if there is particular sounds that make it that tip me off to something going wrong.
Now, are premature babies more likely to have issues?
Absolutely. They are not mature. They are not born
so
ready.
The musculature, everything can be different.
Absolutely, everything.
I never thought about that.
Premature babies have more difficulty nursing. There's no doubt about that.
Earlier on, when you and I were talking months ago, when we initially met, you talked about the size of a baby's stomach, and I'm thinking, okay, if the baby's this big, the stomach this big. I mean, I'm trying to visualize, being a visual person, and you showed me what it actually is. I was astounded. I was absolutely astounded at the size. And I could imagine people trying to overfeed their babies if they had the same perception or lack of education that I had.
Well, these are my belly balls, and this is just a scale model of the size of an infant's stomach. The top one, which is about the size of a marble, is about the size of a baby's stomach on the newborn day. They're day one, when they're first born. The second ball is about the size of their stomach on day 3, which is usually when a mother's mature milk comes in. In those first 3 days, the baby is usually drinking colostrum, which is a very thick and smaller volume fluid. And usually between 3 and 5 days after the birth, the milk starts to come in more plentifully, and that's when the baby's stomach starts to grow because they start to eat more. This is a 10-day tummy, so it still is only holding about 2.5 to 3 ounces. So that's a typical size of a baby's stomach. And then thereafter, it grows a little bit more, but not too much more.
So the actual makeup of the breast milk changes? Like, does it change with antibodies? You talked about the thickness of it. Is it literally changing as the baby's changing, or is the baby changing as the breast milk's changing, or both?
Absolutely, it is. And you mentioned something before about premature infants, is that a premature baby's mother's breast milk for a premature baby is different than a full-term baby's breast milk, because the mother's body knows when the baby is being born, so it will start making milk with a lot more antibodies and a lot more things that the baby will need at the time of the birth.
That's amazing to consider, isn't
Again, nature's way. This is how nature wants to preserve the species. A term baby will also have plenty of that really great, the rich colostrum is so rich in antibodies, in one of the things that a colostrum does is it helps the baby move its first bowel movement out. So it's kind of like a cathartic.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, taking a little bit of, some medication to get things going down there. So there's a lot of really wonderful things in colostrum. And it's gold. It's like a yellow color, very thick, and just what the baby needs for those first few days.
That's amazing, really, to consider how magical. Nature just knows what it's doing.
It does.
Some people have or feel that there is a stigma around breastfeeding, and you read things in the newspaper and see them on the news that someone was harassed for breastfeeding in what was determined to be an inappropriate place by someone. What do you have to say about that? I mean, they were talking about public places and what's going on with people's perception that that would be the case?
Well, again, we've had 100 years of bottle feeding that the culture is not that is as accepting about breastfeeding in public as perhaps another country would be. There are countries where women wear burqas over their heads and they cover their entire body, but it is totally acceptable for them to breastfeed in their culture. And that happens all the time on the main roads. But here in the United States, it's very different. So we have a different culture, and overcoming the stigmas is one of the reasons why some people choose not to breastfeed, because they don't want to have to worry about being in public and being harassed. Right now, in every state in the union, there is a law on the books that protects mothers to be breastfeeding in public places. There are also laws that protect mothers who are breastfeeding and working, and allowing them time to also express their milk so that they can use it for their babies when they go back home. Not every state has one of those, but across the country there are usually breastfeeding in public laws that are
hopefully we're working toward allowing working moms toward
yes,
the ability to express.
Well, Connecticut and New York both have laws on the books for working mothers.
Good to know. Do you have any advice? I know, I'm not talking personally now, what is the recommended age range for people to stop breastfeeding from birth to, or is that totally up to the mom?
There is no recommended age of weaning. The American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that babies breastfeed exclusively with nothing else until about their 6th month of age. And then after that, you can introduce complementary solid foods, but to continue to breastfeed until the baby is about 12 months. The World Health Organization extends that to 2 years, saying that it is best to have the breast milk for the baby for the first 2 years of life, which is when a good part of the brain growth is occurring.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes,
yeah.
and the rest of the organs, the liver, the kidneys, the lungs, the heart. So, there's a lot of growth that happens in the first 2 years, probably the most rapid growth, besides when you become a teenager. So allowing that growth to be bathed in the best food that the baby can get is ideal.
Now, should women keep track of how much their babies are actually ingesting? I mean, is that something that a pediatrician would want to know if they're maybe on target with weight gains and nutrition?
Well, that's a good point, because weight gain is one of the ways to tell if a baby is getting enough milk. Okay. So if they are growing appropriately, not only in height but also in weight, and they're also having, whatever goes in must come out. So if they're having adequate amounts of wet and soiled diapers, then they are usually doing a very good job, and the pediatrician can usually tell that. But one of the reasons why I brought my scale here today is that this can tell me how much a baby actually takes in at the breast. So what I would do is I would weigh the baby prior to feeding, and then we would have the mother nurse the baby. So she would go to the breast.
Right then and there.
Right then and there. And then after the baby finishes nursing, I would put the baby back on the scale and weigh them again. And then I would take the difference of that, and then we can see how much the baby has removed from each side.
And it's accurate because the baby hasn't had a bowel movement or a soiled diaper or urinated. It's total.
But even if they do, it was still there when it started. So,
Oh, I see
you know,
what
the
you
diaper
mean.
is still
So,
on.
okay, so
we haven't
you're
taken anything. If we change
doing
the diaper,
weight.
we need to
Okay,
reweigh them.
understood.
But otherwise, if it was inside and it got into the diaper, it's still being weighed.
Now, we have a few minutes left, and I just want to touch on the work that you are doing on the reservation. It was your first trip, and you know, you'll be building on that. Did you find that a lot of women there weren't as well informed as they could be as far as breastfeeding?
I did. I wish there was more education, not only on the reservation, but with many women who use the government systems that may feel that they just don't know everything there is to know about breastfeeding, and that there is a ready availability of formula through a lot of government programs, and that some people would rather use that. They do find that it is easier to bottle feed a baby than it is to breastfeed because they know exactly how much they get. They sleep longer, they can time everything better, the schedule works better. So it is often more difficult to convince mothers that breastfeeding is better for their babies because of the other I guess the options that are out there for them that may not be as healthy.
In some ways, it might seem more convenient to bottle feed, but when you
That's
think
no
about it,
doubt.
well,
Well, it's for convenience. They're
yeah, I would think
you
it
can't
is.
beat it. I mean, you know, if you know how much your baby is eating, and every 4 hours they get hungry, then that's
And
a lot
if you're
easier.
taking care of your own nutritional needs,
Oh, of course,
that's
yes.
a big responsibility. So we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything you want to be sure that our viewers really understand about a topic that we've never covered before, that I doubt you will see very often covered on many TV programs, except pediatrics maybe?
Yes, well, I do appreciate that you are open to this, because
well.
that's huge to have your viewers be able to see that breastfeeding is part of the sacred journey.
Well, it's important. It's really important.
And my best suggestion is, even though breastfeeding is natural, it doesn't always come naturally. So if you are having difficulty with breastfeeding, then find your tribe, find your community, find people who can help you. Or if you cannot find someone, you can also try to find a lactation consultant. And those are the people who are going to help you get to the next place. And you can find that through an app called Find a Lactation Consultant Directory, which is put out by ILCA, ilca.org, which is the International Lactation Consultant Association.
Well, I think you've been very thorough in sharing things about mom, things about baby, things about society, and I would just invite non-moms, non-breastfeeding moms, dads, children, everyone, to just be a little bit more compassionate and sensitive for people who might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable in public because of some of the misinformation and the myths and the stigmas that are out there. And you've done a lot to, I think, alleviate and educate the public on that. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I look forward to working with you again on the res and invaluable information. So thanks so much, Annie.
Thank you so much, Joyce.
And thank you for joining us on The Sacred Journey. We'll see you next week.